I'm very sure you did not even want that break, because the narrative is so captivating of these young people who were involved in the twin bombings at Ethiopian village and at rugby club, in which we lost nearly 80 Ugandans, innocent ones, by people who thought that what they are doing was to be saluted by Allah and his only prophet, Nabi Muhammad, peace be upon him. I think as they sojourn in Luzira, they now realize that they made a mistake.
Tony Owana really loves our history. He has a passion for doing research, and he shares all this history with you so that you can make informed choices.
Banange, have you subscribed to OwanaPaedia? I don't know what you were waiting for.
And he shares all this history with you so that you can make informed choices.
First of all, I would like to extend from the bottom of my heart my sincere apologies to the families, friends of the people who perished in that tragic day of July 11th. To be honest, I was used in this thing. Issa was so calculative in choosing me. Probably let me tell you how I came to know Issa.
Tony Owana really loves our history. He has a passion for doing research, and he shares all this history with you so that you can make informed choices.
In the last part of this narrative, the third suspect is going to sorrowfully tell you what transpired and what his role was in this deadly action. Please stay on OwanaPaedia and keep the information flowing back to us through our channels.
I am called Mugira Idris. I'm 30. First of all, I would like to extend from the bottom of my heart my sincere apologies to the families, friends of the people who perished in that tragic day of July 11th. To be honest, I was used in this thing. And when I was used, I'm not.
This is used. Okay, continue.
Issa was so calculative in choosing me. Probably let me tell you how I came to know Issa. It was way back in mid-2004 when I was working at Pioneer Mall as a shop attendant, and I was introduced to Issa by a friend called Fred Mbanga. They used to work with Issa at KIU as librarians. So Fred was pursuing a course related to librarianship at Makerere University at the time. And from work he would pass by the shop where I used to work to head on to Makerere. So at times they would come with Issa because Issa had an elder brother who also owns a shop at Pioneer Mall where I used to work. One day as Fred passed by our shop, he came with Issa and introduced me to him, and he told me he also had an elder brother who had a shop around the same mall where I used to work. That's how I came to know about Issa. We are not close at that time as friends because we had totally different lifestyles. I was outgoing, I used to hang out, and then they were always teased as Talibans. He had a friend called Abdu, and they used to dress like Talibans, short kanzus and turbans.
We don't think you're interested in the lifestyle.
Okay. Issa came back this year, late April. and he called me. He called me that he wanted to see me, to meet me. I met him at Pioneer Mall, and he told me how he badly needed a house. He narrated to me that his bosses in Kenya, in their operations, had instructed someone before to get him a house where he could stay. He wanted to come with his wife, and also told me that Kenyan intelligence was trailing him, as well as Ugandan intelligence at the time. We didn't go so much into the conversation. Then he told me that person, which I now know was Mugisha Muhammad, had rented him a house which he rejected. It didn't have the features he wanted. So he told me he was expecting money from someone from Kenya, so he would get a better house, which he later got. One day, Issa, in May, called me, told me he was with a friend from Kenya, and he wanted to leave me some household, he wanted me to keep for him some household items, as he was still looking for the house. And he came with that friend. He was driving a Land Cruiser, dark green. He told me he was Kenyan. I opened for them the gate, they entered, and they offloaded his so-called household items. They were in a big plastic bag. He left them at the house. He asked me where his friend could stay. I told him Niagara Hotel. They went to Niagara. I found them. He booked in. He stayed, and he told me his friend would leave very early in the morning. It's unbelievable but true. I never checked his household items, which he later picked. But I never checked, and up to this moment, I regret that, honestly. So after some time, Issa got a girlfriend. I got to know the girlfriend. That's how we started being close. Issa, my current wife, knew Issa before. Issa knew my current wife before I did. So at the time, I was unemployed. I was emotionally stressed. I had problems, a lot of misunderstandings with my wife. So I would call on Issa, and I took him in as a confidant. At the time, I think that's when Issa made his move. He capitalized on my emotional stress and sowed that seed of evil into me. I was at an internet cafe surfing. He called me. He held me by the hand, took me out to some balcony where it seemed private. He said a long prayer, Arabic prayer, which we call dua. It was long, and held me on the shoulder. He looked me straight in the eye. He held me by the shoulder and looked me straight in the eye, and told me in Luganda, Sebo, this is a call, and you have to respond. He told me apparently he didn't have money. When he gets money from someone still from Kenya, that's when he would go to wreck those places. He also said he wanted also places where Ugandans hang out in large numbers. And the reason he gave, he wanted to punish the Ugandan government as well as the Americans for their involvement in Somalia, because colleagues were dying in Somalia. And at that time, I knew he had been in Somalia before. And I told him, you shouldn't be so loud. My neighbors are soldiers. And he asked me who stays there. And I told him, the army spokesman. So he said those would be also good targets, but do you know of any hangouts? And I told him the only hangout I've ever been in and I saw, it was Kanakazana, where I saw a military pickup with bodyguards. So, but that was 2 years ago, and he said you're not sure of that. He said army officers would be a good target. There would be something good to punish, but they are not worth, they are not worth it. Time went by, he got money, and on the 25th of June, I remember it was a Friday. He called me. I met him. We went around to Gaba, Cape. He didn't like the places where we moved around because that's where I knew whites hung out. When we went back to town, then we headed to Chadondo. Chadondo, people were having fun, and he really liked it. He liked the place. I went back home. That night I remember he bought 2 SIM cards, which he inserted in phones, which phones were used in detonating the bombs. That time passed. I had some little business relation with Issa. I personally, what I do, I sell clothing, shoes, shirts, t-shirts, jeans, and so we had some closeness in that. I would sell him stuff and he would buy. He was my customer, honestly. So on the Spain, another incident I remember, the Spain-Germany semi-final, he called me to find him in Mashindye, where I took a boat and found him. He told me his younger brother, Hassan Lima, Haruna, had found another place, another target, and that was Icelink. I hadn't seen Hassan. He was dressed differently from the way I know him, the way he dresses normally. He had a cape and he had a scarf. Issa told me he's going to take us where Hassan had found the place. It was just across where I found him. We went, we watched the first half. When it ended, he suggested that we move out so that Hassan could take us to the other spot, which was another target. We went with Issa and Hassan on borders to Kabalagala. We reached a place at Sherry's, that's where we watched the second half of the game. At Sherry's there was security. We entered. After the game, we went out. So that's when Hassan suggested that we go to Ethiopian village. That's the second spot he had wrecked. We walked slowly to Ethiopian village, but at the time there were no people. There were hardly anyone, so we didn't spend time there. But Hassan insisted that the time he had been there were whites, and he had seen whites and a lot of Ethiopians. So Issa told him he should come that Friday. Issa told him he should come back that Friday to confirm on that target. And Issa, I remember him saying he was going to Kenya that Friday, so that could be his cover, so that he could have an alibi when the incidents happened. That night we separated and everyone went home. The next time I heard from him was Friday. I found him at Prime Complex. He was a bit stressed. He told me he was expecting still money from someone from Kenya, and that someone had delayed on Ginger Road. He wanted to travel to Kenya, but he failed. So he told me he's still waiting for that someone, but he wanted me to meet his so-called visitors, the suicide bombers. He wanted me to meet them the following day, that was Saturday, so that they could be familiar with me. He wanted me to meet them on the 10th, so that they could know me and I could know them. He told me one was a Kenyan and the other was a Somali. That day we separated. I was really stressed at the time. I went home early and I left him in town still waiting for that person to bring him money. On Saturday, I had been instructed by my father to go to Bogo Mixed, where my younger brother is. He's in senior 4, to check on his academic progress. I went and I disappointed Issa in that. He called me when I reached there at around midday. When I was there, he called me often and he sounded so disappointed that I hadn't made it up to him. I got back to I reached town. I got back to town, and I reached there at around 4:30. I first prayed. Then, when I was at that same internet cafe, it's called Galaxy, at Trace Plaza, he called me, and I told him I was there. He met me at around 6:20. I told him to give me some 5 minutes to finish what I was doing. He insisted he wanted to see me right there, and then still he led me out. And I think, to be honest, I think these people like Issa have magic spells, because when he talks to you, you'll never think straight again, honestly. And I know he still held me by the hand. He held me by the hand, he led me out, said that long prayer again, and he told me he was to leave that night. He was to leave that night. He told me now my new role was to take the Kenyan to Chadondo and just drop him there. That was all. That's what he told me. And he told me, since I had disappointed him, his younger brother would take me to his house he rented in Parazone. I had never been there before. His house he rented in Parazone, Namasuba. His younger brother would take me there, and he would, that's when I would meet the suicide bombers, his so-called visitors. And he always referred to them as martyrs. That evening, he told me I would contact Hassan by phone, then we'd meet and he would take me. We separated and told me he was to leave on the 8 o'clock bus to Kenya. He wanted alibi, that I know. I contacted Hassan at around 6:30. I met him at Gazaland. He wanted to have a haircut. I escorted him. He had his hair cut. Then I wanted to ease myself. Hassan, being familiar with that building, directed me to go some toilet. I went, I spent like 4 minutes, then I came out. On coming out, I find Issa with Hassan engaged in another conversation. He hadn't left. I gave them some space. I was standing a few meters from them, and Issa realized, he saw me, and he seemed a bit surprised. He called me, and he said, I didn't know you were standing there. So he told me he had given the final instructions to Hassan, and he told me, I'm giving you my key to the house so that you can sneak in. That's when he gave me the key, and he said now he was leaving, and they separated. We headed with Hassan to Mutasa Cafe where he bought 2 phones, used phones. I remember it was a Nokia 3510i and MTN Kabiriti. One incident I forgot to tell you. These people are strong-hearted, because when I met Issa in Machi, India, and asked him how about Hassan, how did he told me, Hassan, let me tell what he said, Hassan ensonga yajagala dda era ye bulijjo abadde alindiridde. That's what he told me in Machi, India. So these people are really strong-hearted and determined. We were headed to Hassan, to Mutasa Cafe. He bought the 2 phones. We headed to the old taxi park, and he took me to that safe house in Parazone. He opened, and we sneaked in. I found there 2 guys. One was light-skinned, with protruding upper teeth and a bit thin, and I recognized that one as a Somali. That was around 8:30 at night. The other one was dark with a flat nose and a bit shorter than the other. And I recognized that one as the Kenyan. Hassan told them, because he told me what he told them that this is our colleague, so you shouldn't worry. I sat on the floor and they are most of the time talking with Hassan, but they never talked so much. So Hassan later gave them they were talking Swahili with Hassan. So he told me that he had told them to dress up for the final raking. Then Hassan told me he's not so comfortable with the Somali, so he's going to go with the Kenyan. He feels comfortable with the Kenyan, so he's going to go with the Kenyan to show him his spots. Yet Issa had already moved with the Kenyan. He had made it comfortable for me because he had taken around the Kenyan at Chadondo. So my role was just to drop him. But Hassan changed the plan that night. He told them to dress up. I asked him how I was going to communicate with the Somali because I don't speak Swahili. But he said I would find a way. It really burdened me. He said I would find a way. They dressed up. Hassan went out first with the Kenyan. After a few minutes, like 10, I went out with the Somali. We took a taxi to town from the main road. Then we took another taxi to Chadondo. I was the one paying. We went to Chadondo. There was no security. People were there having fun. He seemed excited. He signaled me to take him around, which I did. We didn't spend like a lot of time. We spent like 25 to 30 minutes. I was taking a soda, and to be honest, I wasn't comfortable, honestly. We headed back home. I had the key to the safe house. We took taxis head back home. I had the keys. I opened. He sneaked in, and I looked, and I went back to where I stay. Hassan hadn't come back with his Kenyan. On the Sunday, that's when the incident happened. In the morning around 10, Hassan calls me to meet him at Kenjoy Najana Nkumbi, Kenjoy supermarket. I got there, I meet him. I was putting on a hat, and he told me to give him that hat. It would help him to disguise himself. He also told me to get him a t-shirt because he hadn't been staying at his home those days. He was staying with those visitors, with Issa. And I told him I would bring it. He told me I was to meet him at that place, at the safe house, at 4:30 in the evening, so we could get familiar with those visitors, the suicide bombers. I went back, I left him. I was going to buy them eats. I left him, I went back to my home. And in the evening, the whole day, honestly, I had a running stomach. I wasn't myself. I was so stressed. At around 6:40 in the evening, I took a border and went to that safe house. I opened, sneaked in. and Hassan was there with the suicide bombers. Hassan was there with the suicide bombers. He complained of my being late. I told him I had been engaged in other things. He told me they had already assembled the explosives and took them a lot of time, so I won't get a chance to see. They can't reassemble. So they laid down the body explosives that they were supposed to wear. They had a toolbox. Then they started wiring and testing. They used a small bulb to test. And they would tell him, and he would tell me in Uganda that, yeah, now that's fine, and that's fine. That's when they brought out laptop bags from another bedroom. It was a 3-roomed house. They brought out two laptop bags from the other bedroom. They laid them on the floor. They unzipped one partly, and they removed a phone, connected to the explosive with 2 wires. They disconnected it. They disconnected that phone, and using that same bulb, it also had wires. They connected to the phone, and they pulled out of the laptop bag another phone which wasn't connected. They switched it on, and they called the phone that had been connected to the bulb. It lit, and they told Hassan that now the circuit is complete, shows that the circuit is complete. So they had to connect the phone back to the explosives. That phone had Betty. It had a number saved in as Betty, in it BETI. That time it had reached around 8 o'clock, and Hassan told me we had to go in the other room and pray. They put the phone back in the side bag of that laptop bag, and the other one in the explosives, and they zipped it up. We went in the other room to pray, Isha. When we came out, they told him that they had also tested the other explosives in the laptop bag. So that time we are seated there. He told them to dress up as time was going. They dressed up. I remember the Somali, he unpacked clothes they were new, a shirt, it was long-sleeved shirt, and a greyish trouser. It was also in a kavera, new. He dressed up. He put on his explosive vest and put on the shirt. He tucked in, and then he went in the bedroom. He got a jacket, a tracksuit jacket that he zipped up. And Hassan told me, how is he? I told him, yeah, he looks fine. Then the Kenyan just came out of the other room, already dressed. He was in a jumper and creamish. The trousers were cream in color, I remember. So Hassan, the Somali was not able to bend to put on his shoes. So Hassan told me, help him with his shoes. He fixed in his feet. I helped him put on the shoes. Then Hassan told me that they had told him earlier on. He told me in Uganda, Edi bangambye ensonga zino tezeetaaga bbugumu. Mufo ky'okukozesa taxi tulina kukozesa boda. And I took those instructions. He also dressed up. At around 9 we are supposed to leave. So he told me the last caution he gave me, and it was in Uganda still. He said, Eddie, bw'olaba nga gye mulaze abasajja bano aba security nga babafunzizza, teweewalawala kudduka kuvaawo, kubanga bw'onoogwa mu mikono gyabwe kiyinza okutta entegeka zaabwe ez'omu maaso, entegeka ez'omu maaso zonna. So Later, he said, later shahada ofiire mu nsonga. That's what he told me. I really froze, but I was in the trap already. He moved out with the Kenyan. They headed to their spot. After like 10 minutes, I also moved out with the Somali with that laptop bag. We took border borders to Shadondo. They charged us 5,000 each. And they dropped us at Game Shoprite. We crossed, entered Shadondo. The match was already showing. There were little people at the bar. Outside people were really few. All the people were at that area where the match was showing. Now we first went to the bar, bought sodas, then we went and sat at a round table with that Somali. I put the laptop bag on a stool under that table. And we couldn't enter because there were policemen around. And he seemed so impatient that he wanted to find a way of entering, but the place, they had put some metallic barricades around. So he seemed impatient. He was already signaling me, and I told him, police, police. His impatience was growing. That's when I told him that, let's go. I remember there was a small scuffle. It was about a girl, and someone had stolen a phone from a girl. So that's when I realized that security wasn't so tight. That's when I led him. I gave him 5,000. He wanted to take the bag as well. I signaled him to leave it there on the stool. I went with him. Then I showed him the entrance. I followed him. He paid. He was given a coupon for beers, and he entered. I also entered. I paid, I entered, I was given a coupon. Just as you had just a few meters from the entrance. That's where I left him, but before leaving him, he had a digital watch. I remember both him and the Kenyan, they had digital watches. He had a digital watch, so he signaled me to come close, and he showed me 11:15. That time, I remember the second half had started. Another thing, before leaving the house, Hassan told me, among the instructions, I was to detonate the bomb first. That would be the Somali signal that I was out. Hassan narrated to me how the bomb would work. You were just to call that number I had in that phone, and the bomb would detonate. So he told me, you would detonate the bomb in the laptop bag, and that would be the Somali signal to blow himself up. And you detonating that would mean that you're out of range. So when he showed me on his digital watch 11:15, it implied that he was telling me I was to detonate at 11:15. That's the last time I saw him. I remember him saying salama, and I left him in. I moved out. That night I was carrying another bag. It was a bag of shoes. It had shoes in them. I moved out, went to the Chadondo main entrance. I hung around there. Another caution Hassan told me was to make sure that at least the blast went off when I could hear. So I kept around the Chadondo main entrance. Time went by, I was tense. I called a friend just to relieve myself of tension. Just to know how the match was. And I had just finished talking to that friend a few minutes past, and that's when the first blast went off. It did scare me, and I reached in my pocket, pulled out the other phone, and called that number. The second blast went off. I didn't want to be called a traitor by these people. I didn't know their network. I took a boda to Old Taxi Park, took a taxi home. On the boda I removed the SIM card, broke it, threw it on the way, took a taxi home, broke that phone, and dropped it in a pit latrine. And then I moved into the house. I found my wife. She was watching a different program. I told her the match is still on. I wanted to watch the match. I was moving up and down. I switched on the match. Then at some interval, we switched to NTV, and there were breaking news. I started showing live pictures. I know no one can believe, and you're right, what I did is evil. I'm an evil man. But deep down in me, I broke down. Honestly, I didn't know the impact of those explosives. Issa knew. At that point, my life changed entirely. I thought by answering this call, my life would better, but it changed entirely. I've never been the same since then. At least I know. Among the officers, I know. Honestly, you're a friendly man. And among the officers, I know. Once again, from the bottom of my heart. Once again, from the bottom of my heart. I know I'm a monster to you all because of the evil acts I did. The things were rushed into me. As I told you, I wasn't thinking straight. I had emotional stress. I had a lot of misunderstandings with my wife. I had financial problems. And one thing I want to stress, they never promised us any cash. But one thing I want to stress to you, I think these people could be having magic spells, and they are out there. You can't believe me, but once they talk to you, you'll never think straight again. You'll never be able to think straight to make a decision. I want to extend my sincere apologies to the families and friends of all those who perished in that tragic night.
The viewer on OwanaPaedia, I really don't have anything to add. You have seen and heard it all, and all we can pray that these and other nasty things don't happen again. We are reproducing this just around the time it happened in 2010, and that's what OwanaPaedia does best, to keep your history before you, to make sure you don't forget, and to make informed decisions. On behalf of Herbert Semiano, Tony Geoffrey Owana says, wait for more.
OwanaPaedia, Owana for history. If we go, OwanaPaedia,
Banange, have you subscribed to OwanaPaedia? I don't know what you were waiting for.
OwanaPaedia, Owana for history.